Live on stage.
Here we go. Ben, welcome.
Hello. Thank you,
How are you?
sir. How are you today? Good.
I'm great.
No complaints.
Like we were talking about earlier, I'm on the road right now, so doing the classic dial in from a hotel room, fun. But anyway, super excited to have you on here. I was looking
Yeah,
over
I
what
appreciate it.
what our topics were for the day and what you're wanting to talk about, and this is obviously very near and dear to my heart because if you don't get a conversation going, then it ain't going to go anywhere else.
Yeah, it's just
But
going to be
before we jump
awkward.
yeah. So before we jump into all of that, give a quick introduction. Let everybody know who you are.
For sure. So, I see we got an intimate crowd here today. So, thank you for those joining. My name is Ben Bartolone. I work for a company called Aircore. That we'll get to that part. That's not the important part while we're here. But just about 4 years ago and change, I jumped. I was a Broadway producer. I worked my whole life to get into a Broadway office. Theater was my life. I knew what I was going to do my whole life. I never had to think about that until I realized I didn't want to. So I jumped. I met up with a friend, a dear friend, who I will always be thankful for. He and I split a bottle of great wine, and we talked about options, what I could do. I was working 7 days a week. I was working 80 hours a week. I wasn't getting paid that well, and I missed my friends. I missed my family. I missed my spouse. So it was just not a long term plan kind of thing, and broke down my skill set and thought, what can I do in another field? And I thought about maybe going into project management for a minute. I looked at, could I learn how to code in a few months? And everyone here knows the answer was no. And I was a kid that went to play rehearsal when I was little, or when I was like 12, and I took apart my computer. So I was going to go one of those two directions. And I went where people were praising me probably because I was a 12-year-old kid, and I went that direction until I decided it was time to jump into tech. So interviewed a ton of places. I had a lot of lovely conversations with people that were willing to talk to someone that was saying, "I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to learn this." And I took a step down the ladder. I said, "I will be your oldest coordinator, entry level position person there is. I don't care. I'm here to learn. The bones are the same, the details are different." So fast forward 4 years, I'm now founding sales hire at this company called Aircore, which startup like any other. And I've learned the details of it. And what's interesting is the tech world is catching on to what theater has always known is what everyone is calling active listening. Um, I just called scene study. It's like, you talk, I listen, I respond. I take in what you say, I respond onto that. It's a bit of improv, it's a bit of yes and. But I'm really lucky that social skills are in demand, and I was
Absolutely.
really happy that I could transfer that. So that's a bit about me. It's how I got here, and now I love doing this all day.
That's awesome. That's awesome. As with most people that have a varied background, typically you're the most interesting people to talk to, and you bring the most
That's very
interesting
kind.
insights to the table. I say that as somebody that has a very varied background myself. So, excited
That's
to see
awesome.
where this goes. I do have to say, you've already said something extremely interesting to me. I am pretty certain that you are the first and only person that has ever told me they got into tech startups because of a better work-life balance. That's one I've never heard before. Like, hey, that's why I
Sure
wanted to
did.
join.
I mean, I wanted to go somewhere that was a 40-hour work week, and I was willing to stretch that to 45 or 50 sometimes. But honestly, so I had one job as a company manager of an off Broadway show. Generally in theater, the tiers of work are by union contract. Long story short. So I was working particular contract. This was 2010. I was making $500 a week. So I was like, I thought I was living on urge. And my day would start at 10 a.m. The office, workday would end at 6 p.m. The company manager is like the stage manager runs the stage. Everything on stage is run by the stage manager. That's kind of what project managers do. That's why I thought I might pivot there. Company manager runs everything. So 10 to 6, you're in the office. The show starts at 8, 7 on Tuesdays, but usually 8 o'clock, and you're there. you're in the back. You're making sure everything's going well. And after you get the report from the box office, once they close that up, usually around 8:15, 8:20, they give you a report. Sometimes it takes up to 45 minutes for them. I hope by now it's not printed, but in 2010 it was printed and they handed you the report. Theater's a little behind. And then you take it back to your office desk and print that all up and send it out in a report to everybody that night. So generally it was 12, 13-hour days on average. And that was before I got into the Broadway producing world. I'll put it that way. Shit's crazy. Shit's crazy.
Yeah,
it's fun. It's hard. It's hard for longevity.
Yeah, I can imagine. So that's awesome. And obviously, this is really topical right now because most companies, most teams are. I mean, literally just got off of a webinar that I was part of a panel on. And I mean, it's a rare day that I don't have this conversation come up or this topic come up, which is, everything seems to have broken kind of all at once when it goes to, go to market, especially outbound, sales. Obviously macroeconomic stuff, started getting, nasty towards, latter half of last year. Everybody's being asked to do more with less. Teams have been cut, the sales teams, go to market teams in particular have borne the brunt of those cuts and layoffs. You've got investors, board, C-suite breathing down your neck, making sure that you demonstrate ROI. So it's a tough environment. And the question on everybody's mind is like, what do you do in the midst of all of that? Like, I mean, one, the idea that, hey, we're going to navigate this tough market by decimating our go-to-market team will forever be a mystery to me. Like, who came up with that one as like a bright plan, to be able to address this?
Yep.
But be that as it may, the only answer to how you survive something like that is to get really fucking efficient at what you're doing. And on the sales side of things, obviously, like that begins with these, initial touch conversations a lot of times. And so, there's not room for not doing that well anymore. Like you can't just lean on and count on like a numbers volume play. If we put enough butts in seats and give them enough records to dial and, reach out to and, pour enough into the top, something significant is going to come out the other side. That does not work anymore as a calculus for most companies and most teams. So, one, have you seen similar? And then two, what's kind of been your response and how you're operationalizing relative to those things?
It's funny you say butts and seats because that was my MO for years and years and years. And like new night, new seats. Like you can't just because you did literally yesterday, you've packed the house. You got a Thursday night house to fill, so you better get that shit filled. Otherwise, you're falling behind, and the weekly is going to look weird. So, I've never been able to shake that keep the lights on mentality. My wife, who comes from the theater as well, we have this joke that like when we meet someone that like is riding on other people's coattails and isn't really doing it, we have this phrase that like they wouldn't make it in theater. Like you can, and sales not that different in terms of like everything is laid bare. So when you're doing really well, everyone notices, and when you're doing really poorly, everyone notices. Early on in my 20s, I was the host of a restaurant in Little Italy, and that was a trip. But also, if you were doing poorly, like it was the kind of thing of like talk to people on the street, let them know things are good here. Oftentimes it's Elizabeth Street, in Little Italy, so they're visiting, can say this is good and this is good and this is good. And if you look behind you and the tables are full, you're doing your job, but they're not going to be there in 2 hours. And your job is then to fill it and fill it and fill it and just keep that shit rolling. And you kind of have to find the joy in that. Otherwise, do something else. And I don't mean that in a do it or don't. I mean, like, if this doesn't bring you joy, like you were saying, especially now, shit's hard. And I find the moments of joy in this. I find I am an extrovert to a T. Like, there's that, I forget where I read this, but introverts recharge in private and extroverts recharge in public. We kind of procure our rechargement on site through this, like exactly what we're doing now. This is the kind of thing that recharges an extrovert like me. And if it didn't recharge me, I don't know if I'd have such a fun time doing it. So,
Oh yeah.
I've met tons of salespeople, former bosses who do not identify as extroverts and are like, actually, I recharge in private. And I think those people deserve more accolades than anything I do because they're getting it taken away from them each time they have
Hmm.
conversations. While I spoke this morning to a guy in Taipei and I thanked him for staying up late. I didn't realize he was in Taipei. I wouldn't have booked him at 10 a.m. Eastern time. But I was like, that's amazing. Like, I love that we're doing this. And that whole concept is, again, I think I said this before we went live, but like, I am completely a golden retriever. Like that just gets me going through the day. I love interaction. I love meeting new people. And I guess to the point of this is like starting those conversations. Where do you even start? I always, and maybe this is instinct by this point, but to me, instinct is always just memory, longer term until it becomes part of you. I have intense arachnophobia. I don't know why. I've always been fucking terrified of large spiders. Saying it, I want to stand up out of this chair. But I've just accepted like thousands of years of instinct, probably. At one point, that probably saved someone's life to be afraid of something like that. So, my mother was afraid of snakes. My friend is afraid of heights. Those are things that's like, well, that kept us going. Somehow we didn't die because of that. So it's now an instinct, and I've just accepted that's part of it. To me, the instinct of this is I recharge doing this, and I'm completely deviating from your question. I apologize. But just the agenda of this, of like finding those points in common, is usually it's like a mini discovery call to me.
Mhm.
And in the discovery, it's called discovery for a reason. But I always try and be like, hey, I'm coming from here. I saw on your LinkedIn you did this. LinkedIn is really helpful for this because you can see folks' work history of what they're choosing to present, knowing full well, there's probably things people are leaving out on purpose. This is what we choose to present. So choosing from what they're putting out there, I can usually say, oh, cool, I worked at a similar company, or that's the point we have in common, or hey, I see you were a theater major. Amazing. It's more of us out there than I ever realized. And just finding that point and not even agree on, but just go, oh, nice. It's not to say you have to say, we are wearing collared shirts. How much do we have in common? But getting people talking and finding that thing that they want to open up about, obviously it's different for everybody, but that's generally, I think, my MO in terms of starting conversations, whether it's like on the top of my brain or not. If I can get people to open up to me, and I don't mean this in insidious ways, I don't mean then they'll buy from me. I mean, if we can open up, we can find more about what we're looking for. The minute someone opens up, then you can open up and you have that conversation together. And if you can align, cool. And if not, you can say, well, have a nice day. This is great. Thank you so much. I'm going to shut up
No,
for the
it's great.
moment.
And you, you and I have a lot in common on the extrovert side of things. We actually was having a conversation with my wife and daughter earlier this week, last week, I can't remember. And my
So
daughter was
long
just
week.
learning about, yeah, was just learning about introversion, extroversion. Was asking like, what do you think I am? And she and my wife were going back and forth on, basically they were somewhere around the cusp, like probably extrovert, but
Sure.
not super
Spectrum.
extroverted, and
Yeah.
yeah, and then like for me, every time I test, I'm off the scale, and I was like, "Don't worry, I'm extroverted enough for both of you." Like, so I'm right there with you. Like, I absolutely get energized by it. Like, I can do it all day long, and have. I mean, honestly, I have nothing but sympathy for and support for, especially outbound BDR type roles. I've done it. I know how goddamn hard it is, how thankless it is. I mean,
Mhm.
to like go through that much effort and that many no's and that many negative signals and stuff like that to be doing well, to get one win a day. Like, talk about
Mhm.
perseverance, talk about ability to like weather all of that stuff and everything. I have nothing but the utmost respect for, and a soft spot in my heart for reps. Um, But
100%.
yeah, so you were talking about finding opportunities. My co-founder of my first B2B SaaS company, he got his start in fundraising for universities, and so he always called it non-creepy excuses to reach out to people, so that you've got.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good way of saying it.
But yeah, I mean, so you want to find something that you could kick off the conversation with that's not just a straight up sales pitch, but it's not creepy that you know this about them or that you're saying something about it. But one of the things that I've seen reps that really got it and actually were good at it struggle with is that pivot from whatever that thing is that you kick the conversation off with, especially if it's something that's a stretch to be related to business or product or pain point or anything like that. Like when, where, and how do you effectively make that pivot? Because I've watched them get into like multiple email thread conversations around where they went to school, and it's like, all right, now you've burned how much time and how many emails back and forth, and you haven't gotten it to the actual conversation you were aiming to get to. So I'd love to hear sort of your take and advice around that.
Yeah, and that's a pitfall I've fallen into plenty of. Gosh, just going back to theater producing, I went to dinner a few times with a few different people that expressed interest in investing in a show I was working on. And it's a bit like startup investment in the way of like, yeah, we might put some equity in, we might kind of thing. And eventually, the dinner was going so well and it was so fun that like I just didn't know how to make the ask. And I realized, well, I shouldn't just start at the ask. This is like an inch by inch kind of thing, and integrating the ask into the conversation in a way of, so I just started speaking with someone on LinkedIn, working on one of the ICPs my company is looking at is mobile web gaming. And I started talking to someone who's in biz dev at a gaming company. Simple. Um, Connected. They said, yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. And saw on that we had a bunch of theater friends in common on LinkedIn, a bunch of producers, and was like, oh, hey, you and I actually have a lot of theater folks in common. Is this? My opener does include I used to produce Broadway shows because it's an open, like it's like it's I'll take it. And I said, hey, are you in theater as well? And they said, well, a while ago, but not professionally. I'm like, it's all the same. Who cares? And we could just keep talking just on that. But they knew and I knew why I reached out. So it's not a disservice to anybody to say, not at all. That's amazing. So, hey, I was looking at your website and I would love to hear more about this. And maybe it's like a one, like an odds even kind of thing if I would have to quantify it. But I would say like intro, warm up conversation, make point. Warm up conversation, make point. Not so meticulously, but kind of, let's say, weaving those together of I do want to hear more about where you're from and what we're doing, and also I'd love to hear more about why I'm getting in touch to see if there's some synergy here to work together, a word that's entirely overused right now, but just in terms of like, hey, I did get in touch for this. I didn't just get in touch to be friends. This is LinkedIn after all. So like, yes, that can happen too. And at least in my own pitfalls, I would feel guilty for taking that route, as though I was doing someone a disservice by asking them about something business wise. And it's just an uncomfortable thing to get more comfortable with of you're there for the conversation, they're there for the conversation. So, hey, there's no fault, there's no guilt in just saying, hey, why don't we move this forward? And they'll let you know if they're not interested. Simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it,
I love I
it's
love the
pushing those
idea that
lines.
yeah, I love what you included in there. Make sure you at least touch on the real reason of the call early in that conversation. Like you can still continue
Mhm.
on with the whatever it is you have in common or what the soft touch was to get the conversation going and stuff like that. But at least touch on, hey, there's also a reason why I reached out or was doing research for you and stuff like that, which goes hand in hand with that non-creepy piece. Because otherwise, it's like, why were you looking at
Right.
all of that? But so yeah, we kicked it off with kind of the what's going on macro and everything like that right now, and the absolute critical need to be able to be efficient in it. And let's face it, the reason why so many people rested on that easy button for so long that, largely landed us in a
Mhm.
lot of this mess that we're in right now is because, doing that research, finding those things to, reach out about, getting those, contextual conversations going, stuff like that. It's not easy. It's not
No,
super
yeah.
replicable, especially from like a training or building out of a team standpoint, and it's time consuming. It's obviously a whole lot easier to just load a bunch of people into an outreach sequence that's not personalized or whatever, and just let it
Mhm.
run. And so it takes time to be able to do that. And so one of the things that I've always, anytime I was coaching or managing a team, is like, you need to do this and it will help you because ultimately you'll be more efficient and effective at actually getting your conversations going, setting meetings, closing deals, whatever your primary KPI is. But the key
Mhm.
to it is you've got to get efficient, both from a process, time management standpoint, as well as like what signals are you actually looking for? Where do you go to find them and stuff like
Mhm.
that? So what advice do you have for people on how to do that and how to do that well, both from an execution standpoint as well as a time management standpoint?
Gosh, that's a great question. Time management wise, what helps me is not so much when I'm working for my own goals, so much as I am thinking about other people. It's just how I'm wired. And I often think of that as I'm not only going to respect other people's time, but I'm also going to respect that hesitation that's going to pop up when someone that's account executive or SDR reaches out to them. Of course, it's just natural that if I get outreach from an SDR, I'm like, and I'm always down for the conversation because I couldn't be a hypocrite. But I also, there's that half a minute moment, half a tick moment where you're like, and then you settle. I always try and be respectful of folks' time. And if they know there's going to be an ask, I'll just let them know, like you said up front, hey, I do want to hear about this and I'd love to talk about this. But first, tell me about what you're doing this week. I'm having an insane week. How is your week? Is it crazy across the board? Is yours calmer? I hope it is. But that way, like you said, thinking in terms of theater and film and TV, a lot of screenwriters I know say that the first 5 to 10 pages of a script and plays too is you're teaching people how to watch your story. In this
Mhm.
world there are dinosaurs, there are guns, there are that kind of thing. You don't introduce it in the third act of a 3 act structure
Right.
of beginning, the meat of it, the end. You don't introduce things here. You say up front, hey, this story has dinosaurs. Or Game of Thrones, we didn't, I don't know if you've watched Game of Thrones, it's a bit of an outdated reference now, but there were White Walkers in the first scene, and then we didn't see them again for many, many, many episodes. But if we didn't know from day one that existed, it might have been weird to see it later because our brains are like, but I knew the world. So why is there a new thing? So in terms of meeting stuff, one of my favorite things recently, and if you say this, you have to mean it. But I've been saying as I start talking to folks, I say, and I solemnly swear, this does not end in a pitch. I really want to hear feedback wise what would help you. And I've heard people say that and go, that's a nice pitch. I'm like, not a pitch. Like you really have to mean it. You really have to, because you can't go back on your word if you said that. And I have used that in times. People are like, well, cool, but how do if we buy from you guys anyway? I'm like, that sounds amazing. I love that. I was not pitching you, but if you're offering your money, I'm happy to take it. So to the point, I am digressing, but to your point, I think of it as respecting other people's times in the way of they know what's coming. Let's respect what they're expecting from me to happen and say it up front, give a little structure. People in these calls, especially, I love structure. I really appreciate when I am the recipient of another sales call, and someone says, "Hey, you mentioned you're not looking for this right now. I'd love to start a relationship. That sounds great. If it's okay with you, love to run through it. No demo or anything, but mostly, how do you feel about this? Where's your pain point today?" I kind of feel safe. I kind of feel like someone's swaddling me in a way that's like, there's no more questions. I know what this full conversation is going to be. And then, of course, you have to live up to that. Then you have to follow that because then they'll end it and they'll trust you. And to me, that
Mhm.
is everything in anything. I come from a field where people gave me $50,000 because they could meet Hugh Jackman. There was no money coming back to them. I mean, there might be, but the Harry Potter Broadway play just recouped its investment this week. And I couldn't believe it. Honestly, I was like, wait, how long has it been up? It takes forever to recoup in
How
theater.
long has it been up?
Well, there was a break for COVID, but it was, goodness, I'm going to look. It's been over 6 years.
Holy crap.
Cursed Child Broadway opening. And it just recouped. All that to say that people don't actually, I'll come back to this later. But people go to investment in theater because they trust you. And they like your artistic vision. They like who you're working with. But most importantly, they feel safe sending you their money that they probably won't get back. So I've taken that into tech, just being like, hey, let's just build trust. Let's just show that I'm not a piece of shit. Simple as that. Sometimes it's really as simple as that is, oh yeah, no, thanks so much. And it's in other words, people say to you in a good way, they go, yeah, thank you so much. This is great. You're not a piece of shit. Love to talk to you again.
No, I mean, it sounds
I feel
like
I answered your question, but not all of it.
Oh no, that's good. Like I said, we'll let the conversation take us where it goes. But yeah, I 100% agree. At heart, you got to figure out how to be authentic and how to be an actual decent human being. And if you can do those things, then for the most part, the rest will largely follow, in my experience. But I also know, at least for me, and I'm interested to get your take on it. So how do you actually get there? Because obviously most of us from day one, first time we do that, whether it's role playing or whether we're just shoved in the deep end, we're not very good at either of those things. Like we're still trying to remember the product and, the pitch and, heaven forbid you actually have a script that somebody's handed you or had to write yourself. So it's hard to do that. And I keep thinking of anytime I think about that, not just my experience on the sales side of things, but I'm also a adjunct professor at UT, and I remember the first couple of times I taught a course, I was rough, and not just from like a teaching, being in front of the class standpoint, but just being in front of public. Period. And for me, there was really no other way to get there other than just repetition. Like just putting yourself out there. And so, both from the sales as well as the theater side of things, what's your take on that? Is that just something you have to pay your dues on, or are there ways to shortcut that? How do you actually navigate that?
I would say find ways to strike out until you're hitting the bat. And if you have the luxury of being able to strike out in a live situation where the leads aren't, you need to close this many and you feel like you'd be wasting them, that's the most helpful. Granted, this year and this downturn, it's not really the time to do that. That's what role play is good for. Look, role play is awkward as shit. Everyone thinks so. No one thinks role play is not awkward, but it really helps for these reasons. And I think the awkward is because you wouldn't feel awkward if you were in a good place with it. And that's everybody. I don't feel awkward if I'm in a good place with it. If you and I started a role play right now, and I was talking about Aircore, you were talking about RevGenius, or you're teaching one of your classes that you've had practice with now, I feel like it wouldn't be awkward for us because we've got those, we've gone to bat and struck out a bunch already, and now we know how to hit. This always reminds me of, so 2008, I was working at a summer theater company where I was the associate general manager. This is someone, was the associate to the person that pushes money from one side of the table to the other. That was my job, basically. And I was in the numbers. I was in Microsoft Excel somewhere, and my boss came up to me and said, I need someone to give the pre-curtain speech. So you're going to do it today. And let's go walk over to the theater because it's starting in 20 minutes. And I was like, what? Oh, okay, sure. And he was like, so you're going to say this, then you're going to say this. And he gave me 12 things to say. So long story short, I have an actor background. Like, this is nothing new for me, but you stand in a pin spotlight, in like the spotlight, microphone in hand, welcome everyone to the theater. Thank you so much. Here's what we're doing this week, this season. We're really proud of these things. And with your help, we do this. So afterwards we'll be around, but thank you so much. But that's not what I said. I don't remember. I blacked the fuck out. I do not remember what I said, but I knew when I came off stage that the actors were there to comfort me. I was like, oh, that really sucked, didn't it? And they're like, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. But that being said, I couldn't get to the point of speaking in front of 600 people off the cuff if I didn't fuck it up a couple times.
Mhm.
There's, on the baseball term, there's nothing like getting at bats. Like you can simulate it, you can simulate batting practice, but a lot of times I'm a huge baseball fan. You can see people coming up in the system and the prospects and the minors, they're doing well, but you just don't know how good or bad they are until they're on the field. You got to let them play and see how it is. I don't know if basketball is the same way as I was mentioning before. I know very little about basketball, but you just got to let the kid play, as the old term goes. And sales is similar. So allow yourself to fuck up. And if you can fuck up with each other, like, if you or I were working on a new platform and be like, hey, can I give you the worst pitch possible just to get it out of my system? That's if you can find a safe environment to do that in where you won't be negatively affecting your sales numbers, that's great. And if you have the leads or if you have the phone book to do it and you're not worried, just get through them. Get through it. It sucks. We all know it sucks, but it can be a slog, and it's gonna be until it's not. And we all have different metrics of when that happens. It's like studies show that this many, I don't know those things. I'm much more right-brained, but I know that it's like I'm just going to sound kind of dumb in a safe environment until I'm talking to a coworker, talking to a friend who's in tech, who lets me just talk their ear off for 30 minutes and offer me feedback and things like that. But it's just kind of like you got to embrace the awkward until it's not awkward for you to do so, I think. That's
and I mean,
everything.
I think a big key to it is like, don't take yourself too seriously. Try, and I mean, even better if you can have a sense of humor about yourself. Like, hey, that went terrible. I'm gonna go tell the story of how terrible that was and laugh at myself instead of like sitting there and being like, oh
Mhm.
God, that was so terrible. I'm ashamed of it. I don't know how I'm ever gonna pick up a phone again. Like, put it out there. Like,
100%.
hey, this went really bad. Hear how funny that is. But it's also, I think, where a huge part of successful, sales teams, especially outbound teams, I think a huge part of it is that culture and that camaraderie, and for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
But obviously, you've got more knowledge transfer. You've got sharing what's working, what's not, which gives people a leg up. It allows people to ramp quicker and stuff like that. But at the heart of it, I think it's that piece you were talking about when you walked off the stage. So it went
Mhm.
poorly or it went wonderfully. You've got people to commiserate with, to help prop you up, or you got people to celebrate with. And if you can take that like one win a day that you're doing well to get and turn that into 10 wins across your team of 10 people, that's a whole lot more rewarding way to function than, hey, I'm just out here on my own and doing it. And that's the reason why I'm a pretty firm believer at this point in my career that for most roles and most departments, like the advantage you get from being able to hire the best talent wherever they are and have a remote team outweighs
Yeah.
the benefits. And there are undoubtedly benefits of having people, locally in a office. One of the only exceptions, and it may be the only exception, is an outbound BDR type function. I think the
Mhm.
benefit in largely around those things I was talking about of having those people actually in person in a single
Yeah.
location, that's arguably one of the only ones where it's like that actually probably outweighs the best talent wherever they are piece of it for that reason. Um, so yeah, I think,
Totally.
and if you're going to be successful as a salesperson, it really does boil down to a numbers game in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
But that's yeah. At the end of the day, like that's one of the best things about screwing something up. You've got a list of however many others to work your way through. Um, what about one thing that's been effective for me in this? It's not just in the sales motion, but in marketing, demand gen, anything like that. It's been particularly effective for me to find opportunities outside of that narrow motion that I'm doing to practice and
Mhm.
iterate on and test and stuff like that. It's sort of like a comedian, like oftentimes will be testing their jokes as they're having
Yeah.
conversations, or they're just out organically, or they're at a party or something like that, instead of having the only time they're testing it is in front of a crowd on the stage. And so, yeah, what do you have any strategies or any things that you leverage around that, trying to, work on that kind of constantly outside of just like actually being on a phone or emailing back and forth, reaching out on LinkedIn?
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because I was thinking of stand-up comedians too, of like Lewis Black's autobiography ends with him starting his stand-up career, and the man had a full life before that too, which is amazing. But he talks about no matter how much he was just digging himself deeper and deeper in the shit on stage, doing terribly, he couldn't help but want to keep digging. And I was like, that's it, right? You just cannot help but want to keep digging until you find your way out. Um, I gauge friends, neighbors, family, anybody, my wife, reaction of how I explain something, and then I watch their face. If you're at a party and someone says, "Oh, what do you do?" And I say, "Oh, AirCore provides real-time social, so like audio, video plugins right into mobile apps and websites." And people go, "Cool," and then I say, "All right, next person I talk to, whether it's an hour later or 5 minutes later or 5 days later, I'm like, AirCore removes the thing that keeps everybody from accessing real-time social." They're like, "Oh, the removes part makes sense, but what do you mean real-time social?" And then I'm like, "Okay, didn't understand that, did that." Just trying it out there in the wild is so valuable because you kind of get to practice the elevator pitch without pitching because
Mhm.
no one cares in the best way. They're not going to buy from you. You might be married to them, sort of thing. But it's helpful to say those things and gauge responses. It's actually something I've been doing with my director of product here. We've been doing a ton of interviews with people about the product, about what the use cases are, where ICP fits. But we've been having kind of our own internal testing ground of when does the light bulb go off? And it's been really interesting because AirCore is such a specific use case. It's a suite of SDKs, software development kits, literally code plugs into your platform and gives you what AirMeet is without having to log in elsewhere, things like that. But we've been explaining it in different ways to see how quickly we can get people to the light bulb. And it's to the point that I'm now pulling audio clips and sharing it with my exec team because I'm like, listen, this is how they get it. This is how they don't get it. It's entirely up to us. But we work in a niche. We're not just selling burgers or something. We're not selling sports equipment. This is a specific thing for a specific thing. But practice is free. You can literally, maybe not in New York, but go up to people most places and say, "Can I pitch my company to you real fast? I don't want to sell you anything." And 2 times out of 10, somebody will say, "Okay." 8 times out of 10, they won't talk to you or say no or go fuck yourself. But every so often, if you're typing in a laptop in a coffee shop and the person next to you is doing the same and they take a break for a second, you can ask them. I do. Maybe I'm just shameless, but I go, "I got a weird work question. Can I run something by you?" And if you say work question, they know you're not asking them out. They know you're not asking them for money or anything. Non-creepy questions. So practice all the time. Practice with strangers. Tell your friends because everyone wants to know what you're working on. If you get a new job,
Mhm.
people want to hear about it. If you're in the same job, someone's going to say, "Hey, how's the job?" There's always opportunity, and you can always gauge the other person. Use those mirror neurons you have. Like you can always gauge what their reaction is, even if they don't say it. Because if they say
Mhm.
nothing, that is an answer. So that's my take. It's not to say I'm working 24/7, but I'm always curious to see what lands most.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you should be, the more you chew on it, the more you test it, the more, and I mean, there's a lot to be said for pitching and testing against lay people that don't know the ins and outs of it. They don't know the jargon, all of that stuff. Because if you can get it distilled down so that, somebody that doesn't know all of that and doesn't have all that context gets it, then you're going to
Right.
break through with your actual target audience that much better as well. And I mean, I can't tell you the number of demos or sales calls that I've taken, and it's like, I know the use case. I know the problem you're solving for. Hell, and a lot of times I know the company and the product extremely well. Based off of what they hit me with, it's like if I didn't have that background, I have no idea what you're talking about. No idea what you
100%.
guys do, what you're serving, anything like that. So it's immensely valuable to be able to do that and to have that. And I know the previous company, last company that I worked at as a full time team member, I was doing demand gen. We were a data orchestration company. Talk about something you don't say to a layperson and they're going to have any idea what in the world you talk about. And I mean, it was
Not a
frankly
clue.
6 months
Yes.
after 6 months after joining them that I finally got to the point where I could coherently and succinctly explain what in the hell data orchestration was.
Yeah.
And yeah, it takes a lot of practice. And like if your demand gen person can't do that, like you're in a lot of trouble. So you definitely need to figure these things out whenever you're doing that. Well, cool.
Yeah.
So
I don't
once
know what data
you know,
orchestration is.
so basically the pipes that move data around between systems. So like if you want to get
Oh,
data from
there you go.
Salesforce into a HubSpot, but you don't want to deal with custom
Mhm.
objects and all of the complexities around that, this allows you to be able to pull the data out of one and push it into something else without having to deal with all of that infrastructure and everything like
Sure. So it's a system of APIs essentially to keep data hiding in place.
that. It's a system that plugs into the APIs and then is able to
Got it. Got it.
pull the
I
data
see.
around.
Cool. Cool.
Yep,
And
yep.
side note, that's
Um,
another thing I
uh,
love doing and starting conversations. Sorry, we might have a slight lag. I apologize for cutting you off there.
no, no.
Is I love repeating back when people tell me things about their company to make sure I get it, but also it tells them I'm listening. And that is again building trust. Is like cool. We understand each other. Especially if it's call number two, you can say, all right, what we talked about last time was this, and we talked about this, and you guys are building this thing. Does that sound about right? And I genuinely love that moment where people go, yeah, that's exactly it. Because you're like, here we are, bud. We're here.
Well, I mean, not only
Amazing.
are you demonstrating that like you paid attention, you were listening, you're diligent enough that you took notes, but hell, a lot of the time they don't remember what the previous conversation was, or maybe even who in the world you are. I mean, if they're anything like me, you've got, 10, 12. I mean, I had a day last week where I had 8 meetings before noon. It was like, do you think I had a clue what my next meeting was? It was like, nope, I closed that one down. I'm probably running 5 minutes late by that point, and I'm just opening the next Zoom. And so, like,
Yeah.
that's super, super valuable to do that. But, and it's a great
100%.
segue into the next question that I had, but is okay, so you got them on the call, you got them to reply, you leverage something as a soft intro, whatever, you got a conversation going. How do you then run effectively a discovery call from there? So like now we're actually down to brass tacks. We're talking about what we're here to
Mhm.
talk about. What tools, what suggestions, what tactics do you leverage and do you encourage others to do?
Once you're able to explain, kind of give not even the elevator pitch of your company and what it does, but more just that 30-second soundbite of, and that soundbite changes. You're not going to say and the perfectly every time. But once you can do that succinctly, you can take up, the adage of let them speak half the time, let you speak half the time. You can shorten yours just by knowing how to explain your thing. But so generally, discovery calls, I love to say, thank you so much for joining. So and so. I'm coming from this company, but this is the reason I got in touch, and I'd love to hear about. And then hit him with that first question. I work in user retention, user acquisition, and say we're talking about webinars, and I'm working with a company that has a webinar, but they always have problems with Zoom, and they can't quite log in, and Zoom's expensive for business. And so we got on the call because I said, we could talk about putting your webinar just on your website. And they said, cool. So set the tone and then say, great. And then start in on those questions because you might know a tidbit of what they got on the phone with you for, and just give them questions to show you know what the fuck you're talking about. So how often do you do these webinars? And on average, do you find it's 12 people joining you? It's 4 people joining you? Is it 1,000? Get them talking. To me, that is the gold standard of intro calls is the more people open up, the more they will keep opening up without realizing it. If you can get them talking about their platform and you can inch them towards the problem, they might start to reveal, and again, not in insidious ways, they might tell you more than they intended. And that's perfectly great because it's the actual problem. If people trust you and they're comfortable and you make them comfortable enough to reveal what the actual issue is, salespeople might be therapists sometimes, professional therapists of, what we're looking for is this, but what the real issue is actually this. This is what I'd love to solve. I've heard this. I don't know if this is something you guys do, but we really would love to figure out something around this. I'm like, oh, okay. That's different than why we got on the call. And I'm so glad we know that because that's the real pain point. You know, we hear so much about how to get people to reveal their pain points, and they're not just going to do that. Maybe because they don't know how to articulate it. And sometimes it's just talking with someone about the solution, the problem, what actually is happening versus what you want to happen. And I'm purposely doing this, by the way. I'm not saying a damn thing about myself. I'm letting them talk and asking them questions and digging into the issue because they've seen my website, they've seen my LinkedIn, and maybe they haven't dug into the website, but they have a general idea of why they're using 30 minutes of their time with me. Your calendar probably looks like mine. People are saying, just 15 minutes of your time. Like, when? Like 2 weeks from now? Okay. So if they're using 30 minutes of their time, coming back to that, me respecting what they have, I know they've done a little bit of work on who I am. And if they haven't, they'll ask questions, or I'll save that for the end. In the meantime, thank you so much. I'm Ben. We talked a bit. Love to hear about what you guys are building, and in particular, and then dig into that first discovery question about their platform. We talk about user retention and acquisition. I say, are you having an issue with people sticking? Do people use your game and then drop off? Is there an issue with, do you have spatial audio, and how does that work? I see you have video. How's your video lag time? Is your lag time good? Do you guys enjoy using it? And you can lead those questions. Again, it's not creepy. It's just leading towards a response. And they'll tell you what they want to tell you. And if you keep asking them questions, you find that thing that they keep talking about. You show you know what you're talking about. You show you're listening to them. They'll reveal more and more. And if you don't get to that pain point in the first call and you make them comfortable enough, then you can always say, hey, we're at 30. You probably have to jump. I have a hard stop as well. Do you want to talk again in a few weeks about this? I did this yesterday. It was a gaming company, AR, VR, not sure what they want yet, telling me about what they're exploring. Well, we're looking at Unity for this. And this has nothing to do with AirCore. We're looking at Unity. We're looking at Unreal. We're looking at ways to make sure monetization goes in place. So I'm just not sure where to go from here. And I don't know if that has anything to do with me, but I'm so happy he's telling me because he clearly wants to talk to me. And if you set that trust and you allow those doors to open, you can't open them yourself. This is the most important thing for me. They got to open it from the inside. But if you can allow them to feel comfortable enough to open that shit, they'll keep coming back to you because you're a salesperson that makes them comfortable. And that it's not as much as a unicorn as people think, but it breaks through the fear. And so discovery for me is probably, if it's 30 minutes, I'd say 23 of that, 20 to 23 is them talking, 1 minute of me up top, and then 5 of me at the end, as much as possible. Granted, things change, but that's generally my approach.
Yeah, I love that. But it begs the question. So, I've known many a rep where hey, they internalize that I should speak no more than, 10, 15 minutes of a 30-minute, discovery call. But then you review the tape and it's like, wow, it didn't even go 30 minutes and there's a lot of dead air. And it's like, that gets real awkward. And so, and for some reps, especially those that aren't as, extroverted and outgoing as you or I maybe,
Sure.
Yeah, that can be a challenge for them. What advice do you have for how you actually get that conversation going like that, especially if you're dealing with somebody on the other side that's not very forthcoming with things? How do you keep
Mhm.
that conversation going? How do you develop that trust? Because I think that's another part that you were alluding to, and there is like you need to be somebody who is not just trustworthy, but somebody that can be an authority and provide value. And so,
Mhm.
you got dual roles to play there, and very, very succinctly and quickly establish that as a resource to them that can be trusted and can be valuable, but also be able to nudge and move the conversation in a direction so that you're actually accomplishing what you're there for on the call.
Yeah, I actually ran into this a few weeks ago, and I I never shut up. So as usually I have to pull myself back, because I will want to talk the whole time, as is evident by this conversation. And I very purposely have to say, not to say, Ben, stop talking, listen, but I get so excited to share that it just keeps going. I was speaking to new person, reached out to on LinkedIn, looked at their website, said, "Hey, do you guys have any social interaction around this platform you have? I feel like you probably do. There might be some benefit to keeping people on platform. By using not just AirCore, but something like AirCore." And all that to say, we got on a call. Perfectly nice guy, very neutral, quiet, real quiet. And a lot of this is generally people will talk, but not everybody. And there will be the times that people will just say neutral. And as I was speaking to not just fill the space, but try and learn more about their platform, talk about what I saw on their platform, I was realizing, oh, I'm talking much more than I should. But I, at the same time, was like, rules are meant to be broken. This guy is not speaking. And by minute, I think it was like 26 of 30. I don't time myself. It was like a 3 o'clock and it was 3:26. I just looked at my computer. He went, "Yeah, I'm sorry, man. I've been on like calls for 7 hours straight. This is the last one." And inside I was like, there it fucking is. Like, that's why he's quiet. I just didn't know. And I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Am I your last call? I can shut up now." And we laughed, and I finally got him to crack. He wasn't rude. He was just neutral. And I couldn't figure out why he was so just reserved about the whole thing. So when you need to talk, as I did in that situation, I prepared. I knew a little bit about his platform. I always say, from the outside, it looks like you have this there. And in these cases, is this something that comes up for you? In this case, he said, "No, it's not really." I was like, "Oh, okay." And then, just have to kind of riff on that idea. The awkward silence will happen. And I will say, my dad's a landscape architect. I grew up with landscape drawings all over my house. I have a Frank Lloyd Wright tattoo. Negative space is okay. If it looks like someone is going to say something, like I have a very quiet cousin, and when he and I talk, I sometimes I just do that because I know he'll eventually say something because the words are forming for him. But I think if you can always fill the space by showing your confidence and speaking about their platform, and then asking the questions, and then saying, eventually, if they seem reserved, like with this guy, I said, "And hey, there is definitely a world where AirCore is not anything that will help you, and that's okay. I'm just here to make sure that if I can help you, that's great. And if I can't, then I'm happy to give you recommendations. I'm happy just to talk. I'm happy to wish you well." And you can always kind of give them the out. In this case, that guy was like, "No, no, it's cool. I'd love to hear more." Like, well, I've already said everything I was going to say. So I straight up shared screen, went to his website, and I was like, "This is where I found these ideas. But as the outsider, let me know if this is true." And I went to their website and I looked at, here's the platform. I said, "So I thought multiplayer or multi-user might be helpful in this platform because of this wording here. Is that on point? Am I off the mark?" Generally, you can prompt a response. I'm a huge Chris Voss fan. You can prompt a no response because then people talk. Is this about right? Honestly, in times of silence, I've said things that I know are incorrect because people will go, well, no, actually, it's more like this. And then they're talking. That's like the point. Not to say blatant wrong thing about something in the world, not like the world is flat. But if I looked at, RevGenius's platform, be like, oh, so this is like, this is like a pay Slack, like someone has to pay to join. Am I hearing that right? Just to prompt that, well, no, Ben, it's free. We are really believers in this kind of thing and this kind of thing. And then it's like talking. So if I can kind of blossom a response, it won't always work. But if someone's being quiet, I will always say, is this off everything you're thinking about? Am I totally off target? I don't want to waste your time. And again, you got to mean it. I genuinely don't want to waste your time. Hear them say, no, I'd love to hear more. And then I'll say, in this guy's case, I said, well, what part of your platform would this be really helpful for? Do you know? And he said, not really. I was like, okay, so here's what I thought from the outside. Does this sound right? And then we went through a few of those. And by that point, he's like, yeah, I'm sorry, man. This is my 8th call of the day. I'm like, okay, there it is. I know I'm not insane. There's some reason. But generally, if you can prompt people, prompt them about their life. Not to say, nice shirt, where'd you buy it? But if you were in person, prompt them about, oh man, I used to have those shoes. Like, how do they feel? Mine wore out after a while or something like that. In business terms, just get them talking and practice that with each other. You can always say, I wouldn't respond to that. I would respond to that. If you can make people feel seen, they'll talk. If not, that's okay. You can always let them go. You can always say, all right, well, this has been, I hope this has been helpful. And then you can hang up and write to your friend, be like, I got nothing with that guy.
No, 100%. And I mean, it sounds, cliche, but for me at least, and what I coach my teams with is, lean into the stuff that you do the worst at. Try and go and just repetition exposure. Like if you're super nervous with it, or you're doing a poor job with it, whatever, like that's the thing you got to go do more of, which is uncomfortable because nobody likes to not be good at something. And so if you don't have that discipline, then you're inevitably going to go and iterate on and fine tune the stuff that you're good at, and only do the other part whenever you have to. But the dirty little secret on that side of things is oftentimes as you go through that process and do that, the stuff that you were really bad at and hated at first can oftentimes become your favorite parts. Because you've discovered all of these aspects to it and stuff. And so it becomes, really, really interesting on that side of things. But
Sure.
Well, we are nearly at the end of our time. Before we do, let everybody know where they can find you, Ben.
Yeah, so hit me up on LinkedIn. Real quick, I'm just going to go. There's a few nice comments. David, thank you so much. It's very kind how I put things into perspective. Dylan, you're kind. Ben is so extremely talented in building rapport. It's very nice of you. Hope we can work together. Suki, thank you so much again. You were watching this from 12 or 13 hours ahead, and I appreciate you being up right now. Tyson, how do you handle when a client says no on the last day of the quarter? So real quick, and I'll make this incredibly fast. I was going to walk out of signing up for a gym in January, and I went in January on purpose because I knew there'd be something. And the rep was so good at just finding why I wasn't willing to sign up in that moment. I wanted to make sure this was the best price I could get. I knew there were a few in my neighborhood, but I wasn't going to tell her that. And eventually I was like, yeah, let me just think it over. I'll come back in a few days. And she flat out said, I'd love to hear if there's a reason that this isn't anything you want today. I forget her actual phrasing, but it was so honest. And it was so like in that moment, if you're on this now, Tyson, the last day of the quarter, when you need that quota to close and someone is right there and it's March 31st, there's nothing wrong with kindly being like, yeah, I'd love to hear what your reservations are, not about me or this process, but do you have to check in with somebody else? Is this something you'd be able to do today, or is this a committee? If there's anything I can do today, it would mean a lot to me just to get this through, because I know, and then pin it right back on them, how much this would help you because of the things we talked about. In those moments, it's tricky because you're on your own timeline and it's not quite just about them in that moment. I always try and find the ways, can I excite that person in this moment? Not saying, how can I excite you with this? But, you know, would there be anything that if we woke up tomorrow and you had this live, would your life become easier? Because I'm going to use Dylan, I'm going to use Finder as an example. Would you be able to find people more quickly to have discovery calls? Would your first hour of the day look a little easier knowing you have these things lined up? Is there anything that is keeping you from accessing that today? Even if it's just rhetoric, honestly, excite the shit out of them. That's usually what I've done in the past, Tyson. And there are moments it doesn't work, and sometimes you got to eat that. But if, when in doubt, if you're trying to speed them up on timing, if you can get them excited, excitement is contagious. That's my approach. Those are the LinkedIn
Awesome.
questions. I just wanted to cover that real fast.
No, thank you. Thank you for catching us. All right. Well,
Sure.
thank you so much again, Ben. This has been fantastic. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah.
And
No, thank
for
you. Love
everybody
it.
else, we'll be back next week for another episode.